In 1999, two psychologists at Harvard ran an experiment that changed how scientists understand the human mind. They asked volunteers to watch a short video of people passing a basketball. The volunteers were told to count how many times the players in white shirts passed the ball. Most people counted accurately, and about half of all volunteers completely failed to notice the person in the gorilla suit who walked directly through the middle of the frame, stopped, faced the camera, and walked out. Not a peripheral blur, not a quick flash in the corner of the screen. A full gorilla suit, center frame, 9 seconds on screen. The researchers, Christopher Chabris and Daniel Simons, called what they discovered inattentional blindness. The mind, when focused on a task, does not simply reduce attention to other things, it eliminates them. They become functionally invisible. Not because we are careless, not because we are not paying attention, but because the human brain is not a camera. It is an editor. It decides what matters and cuts everything else from the frame entirely. Chabris and Simons went further after their initial findings. They discovered that even when subjects already knew about the gorilla, when they were primed to expect it, that awareness did not help them notice other unexpected events and new versions of the task. Knowing about one gorilla does not mean you will see the next one. The mind does not become globally alert because it has been warned once. It becomes alert for the specific thing it was warned about, and everything else remains subject to the same categorical filtering. Vigilance is not the same thing as perception. You can be paying complete, genuine, focused attention and still not see what is directly in front of you, if what is directly in front of you has not yet been given a name. For 54 days, investigators, reporters, neighbors, and community members have been looking at Nancy Guthrie's street. They have been watching her house. They have been filming it, canvassing it, analyzing it, and naming every detail they could find. And somewhere in that street, on that road, behind those utility boxes, inside those camera histories and handwritten signs, things were sitting in plain sight that nobody registered as significant until much, much later. This investigation is not a list of what investigators missed. It is something harder than that. It is the story of what the human mind does with information it does not yet have a category for. It is the story of why the most important clue in a case can be visible to 100 people and invisible to all of them at the same time. This is the verdict room. We examine the evidence, we follow the facts, and at the end of every investigation, we deliver the verdict. If you are new here, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. Every week, we go deeper than the headlines, bringing you the forensic analysis, the investigative frameworks, and the details that change the way you understand these cases. If you are already part of this community, hit that like button. It helps more people find investigations like this one. Now let us talk about what was hiding in plain sight. Before we examine any specific clue, we need to establish the geography of where this happened. Because the geography of Via Entrada is not incidental to this story, it is essential to it. Reporter John DePro, who has been covering the Nancy Guthrie case on the ground in Tucson from early in the investigation, was asked to describe Via Entrada, the road that runs through and around Nancy's neighborhood. He said it is like a maze at night. No streetlights. You cannot see the street signs in the dark. That description matters beyond the obvious navigation problem. A road that is disorienting after dark is, by definition, a road that requires prior knowledge to navigate with confidence. You cannot improvise on Via Entrada at 2 in the morning. You cannot rely on instinct if you have never been there before. The road punishes strangers and rewards people who have already been there. People who have already logged the turns, noted the landmarks, learned the points where the path forks, and who know, without being able to see a sign, which way to go. Now picture that same road in daylight. Nothing unusual. A residential street in the Catalina foothills of Tucson. Quiet, unremarkable, the kind of road you could drive through without registering a single detail because nothing about it asks you to pay attention. And that is the trap. It is exactly the trap that whoever planned this crime was counting on. Because here is what the inattentional blindness research tells us with precision. We do not fail to notice things because they are hidden. We fail to notice things because we have not been given a reason to notice them. The gorilla was not disguised. It was invisible because the volunteers were already committed to a task, and the gorilla did not fit the task. The brain filed it as irrelevant and moved on. A car on Via Entrada on a Saturday morning at 10 in the morning is not a gorilla in a basketball game. It is a car on a residential street. It belongs there. The brain sees it, processes it as normal, and files it away. This is not negligence. This is exactly how the human mind is supposed to work. The terrifying possibility, the one this investigation has been quietly circling, is that someone may have understood this. Someone may have chosen a Saturday morning and a residential road in broad daylight specifically because the human mind would do exactly what it did. About 2 weeks after Nancy Guthrie disappeared, investigators pushed a canvas request through Ring's Neighbors platform to residents in the Catalina foothills. Local Tucson stations confirmed the request. The FBI and Pima County Sheriff's deputies wanted residents to search their doorbell footage for 2 specific blocks of time. The first was January 11th, 20 days before the disappearance. The requested window was 9 p.m. to midnight. No public explanation has ever been given for why that date matters. Investigators have acknowledged they are interested in it. They have said nothing further. That silence from a task force that has been deliberate and careful about what it confirms is worth sitting with. When investigators ask for footage without explaining why, it is because they do not yet want whoever left that footage to know they are looking. The second date was January 31st, the day before Nancy was taken. Morning window, 9:30 a.m. to 11 a.m. And embedded in that request, almost as a footnote, was the note that a suspicious vehicle had been spotted on Via Entrada around 10 a.m. No description was given for the vehicle, no make, no color, no direction of travel. What investigators said, through the specificity of requesting a 90-minute window on one road on one morning, is that the car mattered, that someone had noticed it in a way they could not fully explain, that it did not quite fit, and that weeks later, the FBI was committing full resources to finding out what it was. Investigative reporter Dave Mack, speaking on a nationally broadcast true crime program, laid out what the Bureau was pursuing. Every Ring doorbell camera, every security device pointing toward Via Entrada between 10 a.m. and 11:30 a.m. He said the word suspicious is not a random choice. He said, now suspicious. Not exactly sure what that means, but it stuck out, and it stuck out during the daytime. That says a lot. He is right. The word suspicious is not an objective category. It is a perceptual judgment. It means someone registered this car as not belonging, and yet did not, in the moment, know what to do with that registration. Someone noticed the gorilla. They just did not yet know they were watching a basketball game. Think carefully about what the January 31st timeline actually represents. At 9:50 p.m. that evening, Nancy Guthrie was recorded on her own doorbell camera entering her home, returning from dinner at her daughter Annie's house. Her home's doorbell camera disconnected at approximately 1:47 a.m. on February 1st. At around 2:12 a.m., one of her home's cameras classified a person as present. Her pacemaker application disconnected from her phone at 2:28 a.m. 8 minutes later, at 2:36 a.m., a Ring camera approximately 2.5 miles away recorded a vehicle moving through a back road that avoids major intersections, moving away from the neighborhood. Approximately 16 hours separate the car on Via Entrada at 10 a.m. from the pacemaker signal lost at 2:28 a.m. 16 hours between a road being studied in daylight and someone moving through it without hesitation in complete darkness. The confidence required to do that, the unhesitating navigation of an unlit maze at 2 a.m, does not come from luck. It comes from already knowing the route, from having driven it before, from having noted in daylight every turn that cannot be read in the dark. The January 31st morning vehicle and the post-abduction vehicle share a connection that investigators clearly believe is meaningful. The 90-minute surveillance request makes that belief explicit without stating it directly. Retired NYPD Detective Pat Brown reviewed available footage from the early morning hours after the abduction. Analyzing the vehicle visible on a Ring camera at 2:36 a.m., the silhouette, the roofline, the shape of the rear quarter glass, the profile of the vertical brake lights. His analysis pointed toward a specific vehicle make and model. That vehicle has not been publicly identified. Whether the Saturday morning car and the early morning departure vehicle are the same vehicle, investigators have not confirmed. What the FBI's 90-minute surveillance window on January 31st tells us is that they believe the answer to who was on that road before dark is connected to what happened after. And January 11th, 3 weeks earlier, 9 p.m. to midnight, sits in the same category of investigative interest without any public explanation. If the working theory is reconnaissance, if someone was learning this neighborhood over multiple visits, testing timing, clocking the patterns of the street, noting which houses had which cameras and how they were angled, then January 11th is not a footnote. It is the beginning. It is the moment, 3 weeks before Nancy Guthrie was taken, when the thing that would later become a crime was already underway on this street, already visible and invisible to everyone who passed by it. Consider what 3 weeks of reconnaissance actually produces, if that is what it was. It produces certainty. It produces the kind of operational confidence that eliminates improvisation, the kind that knows, before the night arrives, which lights will be on and which will be off, which neighbors walk dogs at 2 a.m. and which are reliably asleep, which camera angles cover which sections of the approach to a specific house on a specific road. The FBI's interest in January 11th, combined with the January 31st morning vehicle and the surveillance request for both dates, describes something that was not conceived and executed in a week. It describes a planning timeline that stretched across an entire month. Every preparation conducted in plain sight, during ordinary hours, by what appeared to be an ordinary car on an ordinary street. And here is the dimension of that planning that deserves particular attention. The window investigators selected for the January 31st canvass request was 9:30 a.m. to 11 a.m., 90 minutes, on a Saturday morning, on one specific road. That precision is not arbitrary. Investigators do not request 90-minute surveillance windows on specific roads without a reason to believe something happened in exactly that window. Someone in the investigative chain had either documented evidence of a vehicle in that window or a witness account credible enough to anchor a surveillance request to it, which means that car on Via Entrada on the morning of January 31st is not speculative. It is an investigative lead that the FBI and Pima County Sheriff's Task Force committed formal resources to pursuing, weeks into a major federal investigation already demanding the attention of hundreds of personnel. In a resource-constrained investigative environment, that commitment says something clear. This matters. The human mind does not flag ordinary. Ordinary is the background the foreground stands against, and if you are thorough enough, ordinary never becomes foreground at all. Now we come to the night itself, and to the piece of evidence that may tell us more about who did this than anything else in the public record, and that spent more than a month being seen without being understood. On February 10, 2026, 9 days after Nancy Guthrie was reported missing, FBI Director Kash Patel released doorbell camera footage recovered from Nancy's Nest device. The FBI had worked with Google to pull it from residual data and back-end systems. The physical camera had been removed from the property, taken, its whereabouts still unaccounted for. The footage that was recovered was instantly absorbed into the national conversation. The backpack, the holster, the gloves, the mask, the movement toward the camera, all of it analyzed at length in hundreds of articles and video breakdowns across every major news platform in the country. And in nearly every one of those pieces, one sentence appeared and was passed over. The suspect was holding a small flashlight in his mouth, not in his hand, not clipped to his gear, between his teeth, pointing forward, hands free, held there while both hands were occupied at the camera bracket. Held the way you hold a flashlight when putting it down is not an option, because putting it down means losing the light you need to continue working. This detail was in the FBI footage from February 10th. It was mentioned in wire reports that ran in hundreds of outlets. It appeared in article after article, and in almost every single case, it occupied one sentence, and then the writer moved on to the backpack or the holster or the height estimate. The flashlight was noted. It was filed, and it was invisible in the most precise sense the inattentional blindness research describes. It was seen and not understood and passed over because nobody had yet given it a category. Nobody had yet named what it meant. Former homicide detective and police commander David Lyons was among the first analysts to give it one. He said, "Not many people instinctively hold a flashlight in their mouth, but those who work in the trades might. An electrician, a plumber." He called it a small thing, but said it could be something down the road. Lyons was doing the cognitive act that the inattentional blindness research tells us must happen before invisible things can be seen. He was naming the category. He was not simply noting that a flashlight was present. He was identifying what kind of person holds a flashlight that way, and placing that behavior inside the frame of a specific population. Once the frame exists, the single sentence that was invisible in 100 articles becomes the sentence the reader cannot stop turning over in their mind. Because this is not a generic behavior. It is not a behavior learned in a classroom or a training academy or from watching a video online. It is learned the way all physical habits are learned, through repetition, in context, over years. An electrician working inside a wall panel has both hands inside the cavity and cannot set the flashlight on a surface that does not exist. A plumber threading pipe beneath a floor joist is in the same position. An HVAC technician, a rough carpenter, a general contractor who has spent thousands of hours in tight spaces with inadequate overhead lighting, they all learn early and permanently that the solution is the mouth. The flashlight goes between the teeth. The hands stay free. The work continues. That posture is so occupation-specific that a retired homicide detective identified it from footage shot in Arizona within days of the footage being released publicly. The detail was out there, the frame was available, and for weeks the sentence went unremarked upon in thousands of articles and comment sections and video analyses because readers did not yet have a reason to stop on it. The frame had not been built. Former FBI profiler Clint Van Zandt reviewed the full footage and said there was a tremendous amount of information that this individual left behind. He was not being rhetorical. The porch footage under behavioral analysis carries a density of identifiable traits. The gait, the decision-making sequence, the choice of how to approach the camera and how to disable it, the composure of movement across a lit surveilled porch in the middle of the night. All of those things contribute to a forensic behavioral profile. There is something else in the footage that behavioral analysts have noted. The manner in which this individual approached the camera was not the approach of someone seeing the installation for the first time. There was no pause of orientation, no moment of adjustment where the body language reflects the brief hesitation of a person figuring out what they are dealing with. The movement to the camera was direct, purposeful, the kind of approach that reflects prior familiarity with what is there and how it is positioned. Former law enforcement analyst Rick Castigar, who spent decades with the Pima County Sheriff's Office, analyzed that footage and noted the specific angle at which the individual approached, positioning his body so that his face remained away from the camera's field of view. That is not an instinctive adjustment made in the moment. That is a learned behavior, a planned behavior. The kind of camera awareness that comes from knowing exactly where the lens is and having decided in advance how to approach it. You do not develop that specific body positioning under pressure in real time. You develop it during reconnaissance, during the visits that preceded February 1st, during the daylight hours when a person on that porch would look like any other visitor, and the brain of every passing driver would file them as irrelevant background. But the flashlight is different from all of those markers. The other behavioral details speak to planning and composure. The flashlight speaks to a physical history, to a body that learned something over years of working in the dark, to a set of hands that have been inside tight spaces enough times that reaching for the mouth to hold a light is not a decision. It is a reflex. Investigators who returned to the Catalina foothills in the weeks after the disappearance brought a specific line of inquiry with them. They asked neighbors for the names of construction workers at nearby properties under development. They asked about former residents, specifically individuals who had lived in the area and moved out shortly before Nancy disappeared. Both lines of inquiry point toward the same underlying question. Was there someone who had professional access to these streets and these homes in the weeks and months before February 1st? An electrician contracted for work in the Catalina foothills knows where the utility infrastructure is because navigating utility infrastructure is the job. A contractor who worked a new build 2 blocks from Nancy's house knows Via Entrada in daylight because he drove it every working morning for however long that job lasted. He knows which way to turn at the fork where the signs do not illuminate at night. A handyman with repeat access to several properties on the same street knows the layout of the neighborhood the way only someone with a physical reason to be there can know it, not from memory constructed consciously, from the body, from the legs and the hands. The kind of knowledge that does not require thinking about because it has already been absorbed into physical habit. But the professional access theory carries a dimension beyond navigation. A tradesperson working legitimately in a neighborhood has something that no casual observer has. A reason to be there that no one questions. A truck parked on Via Entrada for 3 hours while an electrician works a nearby job is not suspicious. It is expected. It is background. Nobody takes down a license plate. Nobody calls in a description. Nobody thinks twice about a person in work clothing walking near a neighboring property to check on something. The professional context provides what the inattentional blindness research would identify as a categorical shield. The brain registers tradesperson working, files it as not relevant, and moves on. If someone with professional access to this neighborhood used that access to conduct reconnaissance, to learn the road, to note the cameras, to identify the utility infrastructure, to build a map of every obstacle between the street and Nancy Guthrie's front door, they did all of it in full view of everyone on that street. Visible to every passing car, every neighbor checking their ring notification, every delivery driver who drove through, and invisible to all of them because the category assigned to a person with a work truck and a reason to be there is not a threat. And then, on a front porch in the early hours of February 1st, with both hands occupied at a doorbell camera bracket and a need for light in the darkness, the body does what it has always done, what it learned over years of working in tight spaces without enough overhead lighting. The flashlight goes in the mouth. The hands stay free. The work continues. That detail was in the footage from the first day it was released. 1 sentence, 100 articles, 6 weeks. Now we come to the night of February 1st itself, and to a discovery that happened neighborhood by neighborhood in the days after the abduction that nobody put together until the pattern was complete. NewsNation investigative reporter Brian Anton broke a story more than 30 days after the abduction. He had spoken to a neighbor whose Ring camera history showed a gap during the critical hours of early February 1st. The footage simply was not there. He reported it. Then other neighbors confirmed the same thing. Camera gaps. Footage marked unavailable. The same window, the same night. Multiple houses. When investigators returned to the neighborhood in early March, the specific question they brought with them was not, "Did you see anything?" It was, "Did your internet go out that night?" Residents confirmed that Pima County deputies were asking exactly that. Officers reportedly told residents that several people had mentioned glitches that night. That phrasing matters. Investigators were not surprised. They were already building a pattern. And the pattern was that an entire neighborhood's surveillance infrastructure went dark, house by house, in a way that each individual resident experienced as their own private inconvenience. Because none of them had a reason to compare notes with their neighbors. Each gap was normal. Each outage was filed as background noise, the most statistically probable explanation. Temporary internet disruption, not worth a phone call, not worth mentioning. The gorilla walked through the frame, and each viewer, sitting alone in their own home, looking at their own camera history, marked it uninteresting infrastructure event. Together, those individual gaps formed something that should not be possible. A coordinated, simultaneous silencing of an entire neighborhood's digital eyes in the exact window when a woman was being taken from her home. That is not an outage. That is an operation. Fox News digital reporter Michael Ruiz published a photograph of a damaged utility box around the corner from Nancy Guthrie's home. The Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed it is investigating whether that box is connected to the outages. Retired FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer publicly raised the question that investigators are privately examining. Did someone damage that box before February 1st to blind the neighborhood before they moved? Each confirmed fact in isolation is mundane. A damaged utility box, some Ring camera gaps, an internet outage in February. Together, a damaged box around the corner from the victim's house, on the same night that multiple neighbors' cameras show gaps, in the same window that investigators believe a woman was taken. Together, they form a planned, deliberate suppression of the neighborhood's ability to record what happened. Two methods operating in parallel. One disrupting the neighborhood's infrastructure from the outside. One disrupting the specific camera on Nancy's porch from the inside. The small device visible in the suspect's pocket in the recovered footage, which criminal defense attorneys analyzing the case publicly noted could serve as a targeted disruption tool. Two methods, one outcome. A street with no digital witnesses and a house with no functioning camera. You do not improvise two methods. You do not arrive at a house with a device in your pocket and spontaneously decide to also damage a utility box around the corner sometime before the night itself. You plan them together. You understand that one method alone might not be enough, that some cameras are wired, that some systems store footage locally, that eliminating the risk of documentation requires redundancy. You have thought about this at a level of operational detail that is not the fingerprint of desperation. It is the fingerprint of preparation. The cameras were silent. The neighborhood slept. And every resident who found a gap in their Ring history the next morning filed it as background noise. Not guerrilla, just static. Utility boxes are invisible in the most complete sense. They sit at the edges of streets and nobody looks at them. They carry no information that matters to a person going about their day. They are not attractive. They are not memorable. They do not change. They exist as static background in the visual environment, the way wallpaper exists in a room, registered once by the brain, filed as permanent fixture, and never looked at again. In a neighborhood that had been under national media coverage for 54 days, that box sat around the corner from the crime scene and nobody reported it until a reporter was specifically scanning for it. Not because it was hidden, because it had no category. It was infrastructure. And infrastructure is background. The damaged box was there the whole time. Now we come to day 50, March 22nd, 2026. 50 days since Nancy Guthrie was taken. The investigation had produced no public arrest, no named suspect, no confirmed identity for the figure on her porch. The Guthrie family had issued a new statement urging Tucson residents to search their memories, their footage, their text messages for anything that might help. The statement included language that is worth stopping on. It said it is possible that a member of this community has information they do not even realize is significant. That phrase, "do not even realize," is the thesis of inattentional blindness applied directly to a live investigation. It is not an accusation. It is an acknowledgement of how human perception actually works. Not that someone is hiding the truth, that someone has it and does not know they have it. On that same day, a community member who had been maintaining a presence on Nancy Guthrie's street was filming, as he had been doing for weeks, and he noticed something that had been there long enough to be weathered by the Arizona sun. Yellow signs, handwritten, posted near the house. He called police. Pima County Sheriff's detectives arrived, examined the signs, and removed one as evidence. The signs read, Guthrie, and beneath that, a woman's name that does not belong to anyone connected to this investigation. Alongside it, a reference to a sheriff's department from a different Arizona county entirely, more than 200 miles from Tucson. A reference to a state fire agency from the same region. And on a second sign, a specific license plate number. Now apply the inattentional blindness question directly. Why did nobody call this in before day 50? For 50 days, yellow items near Nancy Guthrie's home had been placed there by neighbors, community members, and grieving strangers. Flowers, candles, notes, banners. The visual category for yellow objects near that memorial was established and fixed in the minds of everyone who passed by. The brain passing yellow signs near that house filed them in the already existing category. Community expression, memorial, background. The gorilla walked through the frame in a yellow suit, straight through, until someone stopped the basketball count, read the words, and found names and references that do not belong on a grief memorial. The name on the sign belongs to a woman who died in a different Arizona county, in a different year, under circumstances that some community members have disputed in online discussions, though there is no open official investigation and no ruling of foul play. The institutional names written alongside hers, referencing a sheriff's department and a fire agency from that region, not from Tucson, place the sign firmly in a geographic and institutional context that has no obvious connection to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. And yet Pima County detectives working an active federal kidnapping investigation looked at those signs and concluded that collecting one was the correct response. They did not photograph it and leave. They did not treat it as a community member's misplaced grief. They treated it the way trained investigators treat objects that may be relevant to a crime. They collected it. They processed it. They took it away in an evidence bag. Evidence collection is a decision. Every object at a scene that is not collected represents a judgment. A trained professional concluding this does not rise to the threshold of relevance. When an item is collected, the opposite judgment has been made. Someone standing on that street on day 50 looked at a handwritten name from a county 200 miles away, alongside references to a sheriff's department and a fire agency with no obvious connection to this investigation, and decided, this needs to be examined. That decision is itself a piece of information. The signs are not noise. They are signal, and what that signal means is still being determined. But the investigators working this case determined it was worth determining. The license plate number written on the second sign is the most immediately actionable piece of information this entire cluster of clues has produced. A real plate number on a real vehicle means a real registered owner. It means investigators can run it, identify who drove to Nancy Guthrie's street, and determine what that person knows, or believes they know, about what happened on February 1st. That person is either someone with a connection between cases that no investigator has yet identified, or someone operating from personal grievance against institutions they believe wronged them, who attached that grievance to the highest profile missing persons investigation in Tucson in decades. Or, the possibility that cannot be dismissed, someone who has information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, who does not trust the official channels enough to call a tip line, and who chose the only form of communication that felt available to them, a handwritten name on a public street outside a house that the whole world was watching. Someone placed those signs. They stood in the Arizona sun for however many days they stood before anyone read them. Every person who walked past before day 50, every neighbor, every reporter, every investigator canvassing the street, filed yellow objects near a memorial as background noise. Not gorilla, just yellow paper. Now let us step back and look at the 4 investigative elements this video has examined, not as a list, but as a pattern. A suspicious vehicle on Via Entrada on the morning of January 31st, 16 hours before Nancy was taken in complete darkness on that same road. An entire neighborhood surveillance infrastructure going dark, house by house, simultaneously, on the night of the abduction, with each resident certain the outage was only their own. A single sentence in 100 published articles about a flashlight held in the mouth the way tradespersons hold flashlights. Not civilians, not people who learned it from a video, people whose bodies learned it over years of working with both hands in tight spaces. And yellow signs near a memorial that stood in plain sight for 50 days before anyone stopped and read them. What unifies these 4 things is not their content, it is their status. Each one was visible, each one was accessible, each one was documented in material that was already public before this video was made, and each one spent days or weeks or over a month being categorized as something other than what it was, because the frame that would make it significant had not yet been built. This is the central investigative challenge this case presents. Not that the evidence is unavailable, not that the leads have dried up, but that the evidence that exists has been passing through the field of vision of everyone following this case, being filed incorrectly and moving on. The researchers who discovered inattentional blindness made one additional finding that is directly relevant here. They found that simply telling people about the phenomenon, warning them that they might miss things, explaining the cognitive mechanism involved, does not reliably prevent it in new situations. Awareness of the gorilla does not mean you will see the next gorilla. What does help is the specific act of naming a category before looking, of saying, we are looking for vehicles on this road at this time. We are looking for camera gaps that night. We are looking for occupation-specific behaviors in this footage. We are looking for anomalous text on objects near this location. When the category is named in advance, the brain has somewhere to put what it finds. The filter shifts. The gorilla becomes visible. That is what investigators have been doing with the January 31st vehicle canvass request, with the neighborhood internet gap inquiry, with the contractor questions, with the evidence collection of those signs on day 50. They have been naming categories, building frames, going back to what was already seen and asking, what were we actually looking at? That process is not a sign of investigative failure. It is what serious methodical investigation looks like in a case where the evidence requires building the frame to see it, rather than finding evidence that is already named and waiting. This is what Chabris and Simons documented in 1999, and what has been replicated in dozens of studies since. The failure to see is not a character flaw. It is not incompetence or negligence or failure of effort. It is the way the human mind works when it has not yet been given a category to file something into. The brain sees it, has nowhere to put it, and lets it pass. What makes this investigation different from most prolonged missing persons cases is that the unreached evidence does not appear to be buried. It has not required warrants to uncover or forensic breakthroughs to reveal. Every piece examined in this video was visible to people who were physically present. accessible in footage that was already public, or sitting in an article that had already been written and widely read. The car was seen in real time. The outages were experienced in real time. The flashlight was published in the FBI's own release. The sign stood on a public street under constant media coverage. None of it was locked away. What was locked was the frame, the organizing principle that transforms individual observations into connected evidence. Without the frame, the brain does what it always does. It files each thing as unrelated, normal, background, and it moves on. That is the particular challenge of inattentional blindness as an investigative obstacle. It does not hide things. It categorizes them incorrectly. And an incorrect categorization is, in some ways, harder to reverse than concealment. Concealed things can be uncovered once you know they exist. Incorrectly categorized things require someone to look back at what they already saw and realize they were looking at the wrong thing the whole time. That is a harder cognitive act. It requires the observer to first acknowledge that their initial perception was wrong and then rebuild the scene from scratch with a new frame. For 54 days, people with every reason to pay attention have been on Nancy Guthrie Street, working the immediate evidence, processing the forensics, running the leads, and around the periphery of that task, these four things waited. A car in broad daylight on a maze-like road, 16 hours before a woman was taken in the dark on that same road. A neighborhood that lost its digital eyes, exactly when it needed them most. One house at a time, each resident certain it was only their own problem. One sentence in 100 articles about a man who holds a flashlight in his teeth the way people do when their body has spent years learning that this is what you do when both hands are needed and there is no surface to set the light on. And yellow signs near a memorial that nobody read for 50 days. Every one of those things was there. The gorilla walked through the frame the whole time. This video is the frame. If you were on Via Entrada on the morning of January 31st and a vehicle struck you as not quite fitting, even if you dismissed it in the moment, even if you told yourself it was nothing, contact the FBI. Tips can be submitted at tips.fbi.gov or by calling 1-800-CALL-FBI. The FBI's task force in Tucson is still seeking footage from that specific window, and investigators have made clear that footage residents may not consider significant could matter more than they know. If your home camera showed a gap on the night of February 1st, investigators want to know about it. If you had construction or trade workers on your property in the Catalina foothills in the months before February, that information may be relevant. The Guthrie family is offering a reward of over $1 million for information leading to Nancy's safe return, or the arrest of those responsible. Anonymous tips can be submitted to 520-882-7463. Nancy Guthrie has been missing since February 1st, 2026. She has a pacemaker and requires daily heart medication. Her family said someone in this community holds the key to finding resolution in this case. They also said that person may not even know they have it. Every element examined in this investigation has been built on official law enforcement statements, confirmed reporting from credible news organizations, and publicly available investigative analysis. The forensic interpretations and investigative frameworks presented here represent analytical assessment of documented evidence, not conclusions about any specific individual's guilt. That determination belongs to investigators, prosecutors, and a court of law. What the evidence tells us is this: the planning for what happened to Nancy Guthrie began weeks before February 1st. It was conducted in plain sight, by someone who understood that the best cover is not a disguise. It is fitting so completely into the expected visual landscape of a place that the human brain has no reason to apply a second look. And the clues they left behind were visible to everyone who passed by them. They were waiting to be seen. This is the verdict room. If this investigation moved you, if this kind of deep, evidence-based analysis is what you come here for, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. Every week, we examine the evidence, follow the facts, and deliver the verdict. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What detail stood out most to you? What do you think investigators are closest to finding? This is a community built on serious analysis. Let us hear your perspective. The evidence has spoken. Nancy Guthrie deserves to come home.